Hey everybody, it's John Arnold and my colleague here, Chris Fine. We're back again with another podcast. This is our update for the month of April 2019, and I'm just going to welcome Chris onto the call. Chris, how are you doing?
Great, John. It's good to be here. Thanks.
All right, cool. So we have both been traveling a bit, and we've got a fair bit to talk about, but today I think we'll mostly focus on the conference I was at last week in Orlando, the Enterprise Connect 2019 edition. This is kind of the Super Bowl of the collaboration industry. That's what I call it anyways. Mostly for enterprise market, not so much SMB, that's for sure. But this is the place to, I suppose, see and be seen, and it's where most of the players make their big announcements, and everybody wants the time and attention of analysts. So our tribe gets very busy at this place with constant briefings, and I was able to speak on a couple of sessions as well. So it was pretty much a nonstop event. But good as always, and lots of good takeaways. That's what we'll talk about today. But Chris, I just want to kind of get your input as well. You said you were out in California, and I know it wasn't a conference, but you are doing some interesting work, kind of future of work related, I suppose.
Yeah, I'm just continuing my broad work across the space of next generation workplace. Definitely some interesting things to come. Always good to visit Silicon Valley as a whole, I think. But it was a great week. Always enjoy visiting. But I think today our big topic is Enterprise Connect, John. I guess I would start out with the question, can you define what Enterprise Connect really thinks is collaboration, or what is the space that they cover? Because it might help our audience to hear a little bit about that, because collaboration is a big word. And what might that encompass?
Yeah, good, Chris. That's a nice way to start. And you're right. It's like a lot of these industry terms, unified communications, cloud, AI, and even future of work, that touches on where you were last week. And the reason why I wanted to mention that is because future of work is becoming a mainstream term now that's touching on everything. And collaboration is a big part of that. So the idea here for collaboration is really the means to allow teams to perform better. And where this is coming from and why this event is so focused on it is that organizations are pretty enamored with this idea that individual work is important, but ultimately for organizations to be successful, they need to have kind of a framework to support agile teams. So there's kind of two forces at work here. One is this idea that, yes, teams are required to get projects done, and with organizations becoming so distributed now, it's really hard for everyone to be in one place at a time. It's usually impossible, in fact. So this kind of leads to communications technologies as being the enabler for collaboration. So the reverse of that, of course, is that companies do not get effective collaboration results, not because people don't want to work together, but the tools that they have to do so are limited. And the fact that most people are now working remotely or in mobile environments makes it impossible for them to really be part of the collaboration process. It was a very different time when everyone was in one place, and it wasn't hard to get a meeting. Our days weren't as busy. Proximity made it easy for you to just pick up the phone and say, hey, let's meet in 10 minutes, and just everyone goes and everyone gets the job done. Today, that just doesn't happen. So the technologies for collaboration are really central to the ability of these companies to not just to meet and work together and share information, etc., but also to do it as needed. So there's a big push for ad hoc, informal collaboration. And that reflects this bigger idea that the pace of business just keeps getting faster. To stay competitive, you've got to be responsive. Corporate management loves this word agility. They want flexible, flat organizations that can spinning a dime kind of thing. And so to do all those things, you really, collaboration is really kind of the essence of what's involved. If everybody could just work effectively from their desks on their own, we wouldn't need to. But the reality is we're just more effective when we're in teams. And so that's kind of the driver for all of this. And once you identify that as kind of the raison d'etre for making companies more effective and successful, etc., the technologies will follow. And that's what's happening now. So every big company that's been in the communications space is somehow, some way pivoting to supporting collaboration and teamwork. In a nutshell. It's a long nutshell, but that's kind of that's what I'm seeing anyways.
Got it. That's interesting. So what would you say were some of the more innovative ways of becoming more impromptu? I have a few other dimensional questions about various things you said, like what's being done on this or that, but let's start with this one. So, a lot of this collaboration stuff descends from, software like Outlook, and coupled with, video conferencing software, Skype or whatever. I don't mean to single out one manufacturer, but they're across the spectrum. There are these solutions. So how are some of the bigger players adapting to this impromptu requirement?
So the starting point, I think, when you talk about Skype, the starting point really is, in many cases, Microsoft, because that seems to be the ubiquitous set of tools that people use, especially for calendaring and contacts, right? So there are lots of players who build their collaboration solutions around tight integrations with Microsoft. Microsoft itself, of course, wants to be the go-to for all of this stuff, where you wouldn't need any of these other players. But that's where the market gets heated up, because Microsoft, in reality, doesn't have all of the pieces, especially voice, to do all of these things. So you either ally yourself with Microsoft and just try to support their environment, or you try to bring a more complete solution of your own to market, which is what most of the vendors do, which by definition will integrate with Microsoft, because it's pretty hard in enterprise settings to do things without Microsoft. That's just kind of the reality. But the idea about impromptu, Chris, I think is really central to this, because, in legacy times when IT controlled everything and most things were hardware or complex software, doing things like video conferencing and meetings was it was not a smooth process. There was a lot of difficult technology to align. There was limitations on bandwidth availability. In other words, everything had to be scheduled. The video systems were hard to use. They were complex, etc. So, and they were scarce resources. They were only used by the executive teams because they weren't worthy of being used by everybody, because they were just too expensive. So there was a bit of a tier effect there of who got the good stuff. And so as a result, collaboration was almost always a scheduled event. There were only so many meeting rooms, and there were, so you had to book everything in advance. So it had to be really well planned. That's not a very effective way to be responsive to a fast changing market. So supporting ad hoc collaboration is a really important driver here. And the essence of doing that is really simply having applications that are easy to use and are user-centric. So IT doesn't have to have a heavy hand here at all. And that's where the cloud comes in, of course, because when everything is up in the cloud environment, anyone can access these tools, set up a meeting on the fly, let everybody know where it's going to be, and away you go. And that's really the way it should be. And that's the good news about where collaboration is going. It's easy to use. It's accessible for everybody. And that's really the central message a lot of the players had in their announcements at Enterprise Connect.
That's interesting, because I feel that it's interesting to explore the dimension of what vendors are super important when you're in an enterprise context versus more broadly. And I wanted to explore other aspects of this, but when you move, one surprise for me when I left the enterprise IT world, or enterprise employee world a few years ago, was that there's a proliferation of products that I use all the time. It's basically which client, which contact, which mentee, which colleague, completely different every time. But 9 out of 10 of them are cloud-based. So it is where it's going.
Yeah, for sure. And what's also kind of underlying all of this, and we've talked about this before, is kind of the demographic shifts that are happening, right? So, my understanding that millennials are now officially the largest cohort in the workplace in terms of numbers. And so, it's their time. And, that's just going to be the way it goes over the next, indefinitely, of course. So what that means is they use technology differently, of course, being digital natives. Their preferences for tools and applications is not the same as, the digital immigrants who are older and more analog based. So what's happening when you talk about vendors? Well, this is what's given rise to companies like Slack, who come into the marketplace, who don't come from a telephony space background. They don't have email as a native application. That has changed with them, but that's not part of the original game plan, because they have discovered that those aren't the tools that millennials like to use. So they have built kind of organically from the ground up a purpose-built platform that is specifically made for the sensibilities of today's workers. So they have solid traction in the marketplace, and it reflects the fact that there is a hunger out there for ease of use, but also applications that today's workers really rely on to get things done. And that's a very different model from the traditional players, the Ciscos, Avayas, et cetera, who dominate the space, coming out of the telephony world, which is where this started in the first place. But we've come a long way since then. So having a telephony pedigree today is no guarantee of success. Just look at Amazon, Google, where these guys are going into this space, and no one is stopping them, because, the market will speak. And, what works is ease of use. What works is programs and applications that are easy to integrate and, reflect the way people want to work today. So it's a very interesting kind of, shift that's happening as the millennials and the Gen Zs start to become the core of the workforce.
Well, the word is that Gen Zs are very different even from millennials.
Yeah, and we've talked about that too, sure.
Yeah. But, John, what do you think from a technology perspective were any interesting things? Certainly the ongoing migration to the cloud, even by very, traditionally on-prem vendors like Cisco and Microsoft. What else did you see that was interesting looking forward?
Well, I think the big breakthrough technology for this year is AI, and that has been on everybody's lips for a while now. But as the cloud becomes, the standard for how things are done, and certainly anything new that comes along, the cloud is really the engine that makes AI possible. So once the cloud is kind of validated as the model for collaboration platforms, then the next step to integrating AI, or what they call infusing AI applications into the collaboration kind of tool set, becomes a much easier and more logical thing to do, because what you're trying to do with AI is, on one level, automate steps and processes in collaboration. So, Amazon for Business is a fairly simple but good example of that. So they have Alexa for Business demonstrated there, and that's been out for a little while now. But having an Echo device on a conference room table makes it a kind of a one-stop process to go in and just ask Alexa to start the meeting, ask Alexa to turn the lights down, ask Alexa to invite these people to the meeting, ask Alexa to call this person to dial in, ask Alexa to share the slides with everybody. All of a sudden you have this automation tool that's AI driven, that and is, by the way, a lot of it is speech technology driven, is a way to kind of automate processes. So meetings take less time. They are more effective because the right people are there. The right people can contribute to the meeting and access the information and share the information. So these are all kind of good results of having AI built into the process. So the automation piece is really important. But then the next layer, what we're trying to get to is having more intelligence, not just automation, but intelligence in the collaboration process. And what that means is having, it could be chatbots, but it just could be this idea of AI can access and gather and synthesize data on a much broader, scale and faster than humans can do. So if part of your collaboration effort is to maybe do some archival research to pull up information that's relevant from many sources or over a long period of time, you can use AI tools to initiate a research kind of flow that it could do very quickly and at no cost. And that's a much better way to do things than having a couple of interns go and do the research by hand, right?
For sure. I want to ask you one more question, and I think probably we may have to have part 2 of this. There's a lot to talk about, but in light of what you said about AI and basically a kind of robotic process automation, was it your sense that the vendors were aware of how big the startup problem is with conferences? I mean, the initiation problem, because statistically in many studies, it's really about getting meetings started, whether they're ad hoc or scheduled, all the AV things and the various issues people have connecting and the difficulty of connecting. Because once meetings get started, the statistics usually indicate that they're kind of okay unless somebody has a connectivity problem or some new person has to join. Yeah. But do you think they address the mechanics of this?
Oh, yeah. Well, certainly Alexa for Business was a good example of that, but so was Microsoft and Cisco doing their demonstration. So, Cisco, for example, has what's called Webex Assistant, where it's all about getting that, as you said, the first step of the meeting going. So in other words, they use a concept called proximity, where when you enter a room, and you have either your mobile or your laptop on you, the sensors inside the video conferencing board can already identify you. You don't have to say, "Hey, it's John here." It already knows because it's picked it up from your GPS. Anything that's got a tracker on your device, it will just, as soon as you walk in the room and it detects you, it will say, "Hi, John. Welcome. Are you ready to start the meeting?" And because it's already got the calendar invites, it knows who's supposed to be there. It's kind of like you don't even have to push a button. It just acknowledges you, so you're validated, and authentication is an important part of this, of course. And then it takes it from there because it's already designed to get that front end piece out of the way. But it is also important to note that in meetings, especially when a lot of remote people are there, another element of AI that's kind of cool, it's mostly speech rec driven, is this idea of when you've got a lot of crosstalk, and there might be 2 Johns in the room or 2 Chris's in the room and 2 Johns in the room. Well, the AI and good quality speech rec can not only just identify who is talking, but it can also identify you visually. So there's a lot of facial recognition that's being built into these applications now, where your name, Cisco did a good demo of this, where your name will actually show as kind of like a subtitle on the screen. So if you have people in the meeting who don't necessarily know everybody, instead of having to guess who's there, it already identifies, with a little title under your name. And it's pretty interesting how they do that. And to show how good this technology is getting, in one of the Cisco demos, they did to show its quality. One of the people in the meeting who had his head shaved said, "Hey, this is me in the meeting, and notice that my name is showing up correctly underneath me. Well, I'm going to mix it up a little bit. I'm going to take my glasses off, and I'm going to put a big crazy wig on my head just to change the way I look." And the facial recognition still got it right. So it's showing that there's intelligence built into this that ultimately makes the meeting experience a lot more intuitive. And also, because it can do things like real-time transcription, you can see all the narrative in, speech to text format. So now you can read it. So now you don't have to worry about taking notes in the meeting, and you can just concentrate on what's going on in the room. So, yeah, I agree, Chris. There's a lot more we can cover off here, but I think that gives you kind of the essence of, what that new thread of AI is starting to look like when you marry it to collaboration.
Well, it sounds like we should definitely have a part two to this, John. That's very intriguing. I could think of a dozen questions to ask on the follow-up just of that, but I think we're getting near the end of our time here.
Yeah, I think you're right. More to talk about, and it's whatever we talked about here and what we will talk about again from Enterprise Connect. You'll see those themes coming up at other events too. You're going to be going to one coming up soon as well, right?
Well, I'm actually going to two in the next few weeks. I'm going to go to a presentation by a research firm called Leesman, which does a lot of interesting work about quality of workplace, and they have a standard benchmarking and metric system and a huge database worldwide of employee responses. So that's going to be interesting. And then my other area, as you know, is security. So I'm going to go to the Continuity Insights conference in mid-April, and that should be very interesting. And I'm sure there are some takeaways there in terms of collaboration and communications as well.
Great. Okay. We got a lot to talk about. All right, but we're going to call it a day right now because we all have to get back to work. All right, so that's a good way to end it, I think, Chris. So thank you again, as always. And
thanks, John.
You're welcome. You're welcome. And let's wrap it up and move on. And we hope you enjoyed what we had to talk about today. And we'll be back for the next issue of the newsletter. And by the way, if you're not a subscriber to the newsletter, I sure hope you become one. And to do that, you can just go to my website, jarnoldassociates.com, and it's very easy to find a sign-up form there, and then you can get them automatically every month, and you can read what's in there and pick up our podcasts. So with that, we'll sign off. Chris, again, thank you.
Thanks, John. Thanks, everybody. We'll talk again soon.
Yeah. Okay. Over and out. Bye for now.